You know, many of us carry these gadgets today, these smartphones. They're terrific. They're not so much for talking on anymore these days, but you can load all these programs, all these applications on them. So you've heard that little phrase, apps. There are, I was going to say thousands of apps. There might be millions, literally, of apps out there that you can load onto your phone that do all sorts of things. And one type of app in particular that caught my eye this week was apps for the purpose of recognition. So say you are in a restaurant or just listening to the radio or something, and you hear a song come on and you're like, oh, I know what that song is. What is it? Well, you can just go to your smartphone and hit what's called the Shazam app, if you've downloaded it, and give it a couple seconds, and then it will tell you the singer of the song, the original composer, the date of first release. If you're one of those people that sometimes gets a tune stuck in your head, and you're like, oh, but what is that? You can go to another app, hum it into your phone, and you'll get that same information. Then there's the wardrobe recognition apps. So if you are in your closet or in your bedroom and you're picking out your clothes for the day, and you're having some issues determining what color your clothes are, this can help you out. Now, I will testify to this, that for myself, the biggest challenge in this regard comes between those, and gentlemen, come on, you're with me, comes between those dark navy blue socks and the black socks. And being able to, there are times I have to go to the window and hang them out into that natural light, but there is now an app where you can take a picture of your socks, and it will tell you if it's blue or black. Then there is the recognition app that really struck me for this week, and it is the recognition app for a restaurant, for mealtime, where if you are at a restaurant, or you could even be in your own home, you can take a picture of what's on your plate. And after a second or two, you will get a printout that identifies the meal and then lists the calorie breakdown of what it is you are about to eat. Now, the disciples on their way to Emmaus could have used one of these smartphone apps, because the risen Lord comes up right alongside them, and they don't even recognize him. They walk along, they invite him to stay overnight, and then Jesus uses another tool, far superior to this, in which he breaks bread and shares the cup. And then they're able to recognize the risen Lord in their midst. This sacrament that we've been sharing through the season of Easter blesses us in many ways. But one way, of course, is that it helps us to experience, to recognize the risen Lord in our own midst. And then, as Paul wrote in Gary's passage, because there is one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of the same bread. This meal we receive joins us into the body of Christ. Now, the passage that I read touches on a topic that I brought up a couple weeks ago, because Paul is writing to the Corinthians, and he's observing what he's heard, evidently, that there is divisions among the people, and that some are gathering for the meal early, taking the meal, eating to excess, getting drunk. others coming later, and these would typically be people who were working, maybe less affluent, were coming to the meal late, and there wasn't enough to go around. What was meant to be a time of unity had become, in the Corinthian church, a time of separation of little cliques, different groups, and the body was apart. That exactly is the context of what Paul condemns, what he identifies as being an unworthy eating of the supper, where the body is broken apart, where some are left without while others are gorging themselves. Over the years, this particular passage, which says, "Do not eat of the supper unless you have examined yourself," those words have been taken from that context and applied at times extremely rigorously in different faith traditions, including our own. There was a period of time in some wings of the Presbyterian church where prior to a communion Sunday, you had to go to evening services, and there could be multiple services during the week, and it was assumed that attendance at those weeknight services would decline through the week as night by night more and more people came to realize that they were unworthy to receive the Lord's Supper. It's ironic that the church's administration of this sacrament became a means of excluding people when the basis for the sacrament is one of open invitation. You know, if you think about it, Christ went to the cross not because we were good. Christ served those at that upper room, all 12 of them. And who was present? Judas, Peter, who will deny his Lord quickly, and the rest of the disciples, who, if they didn't outright betray Jesus, certainly were nowhere to be seen when he is arrested. We are all sinners, and we all approach this table not because we're worthy, but because we are, one, forgiven, two, so very loved. There was a small town on the coast of Denmark. It's one of those small towns where the homes are all whitewashed and they have thatched roofs on them. And in this town was a church that had been started by a pastor, and he had 2 daughters. And over time, the congregation grew, and there was the tradition, of course, of Sunday morning going to church, but then later in the day, a core group of the congregation would come to the pastor's home for a prayer meeting, followed by a light meal. After a while, the pastor died, and the 2 daughters carried on this tradition of church and then inviting the congregation to come to their home for prayer and then a light meal. But over time, the church fellowship became a quarrelsome group. They would still come to the home for a meal, but they started to bicker. Now, around this time, a French woman appeared in the village. She had fled France because of the upheaval of the day. This is probably in the mid-1800s. And she went to this home of the 2 sisters and said, "I just beg you, can you please take me in?" And they did, and she became their maid and their cook. She had one enduring connection to France, and that is she had a nephew in Paris. And each year, under her direction, he bought a lottery ticket for her. So each year she would send that request to him, and he would carry out that office. One year, a letter came back, and she found out that she had won that lottery, and she had won 10,000 French francs. So she approached the two daughters, and she said, I would like to prepare a special dinner, a real French dinner, vrai dîner français, she said, for the body, by the members of the congregation who come for prayer and meal. And the daughters said, okay, that they would allow that. But then she said, but I want to pay for it myself. They objected, but she insisted, and they said, okay. They would not know that she would go on to spend her entire lottery winnings on this one meal. She sent off to Paris for all the finest wines and Cornish hens and the turtles and the spices, the whole 9 yards. And as all these things started arriving in the village, the two daughters were uncomfortable. It seemed outlandish, it seemed extravagant, it seemed excessive. It was a scandal in their eyes. So they gathered the church body and they said, we're so sorry, we shouldn't have had this meal. But the church member said, it's okay, we'll come and we'll eat the meal, but we won't say a thing about it. And so they came to the home to celebrate what, if you've seen the movie, was called Babette's Feast. Everyone came into the dining room and they saw this Spartan table they had visited at for years, covered with a silk cloth with candelabra and china and plates and glasses and big napkins and spoons and forks. They sat down and they began to have their meal. And to their word, they did not say a thing about the food, except that opening soup was so good that one of them started just to lift the bowl and to drink it like you did your Cheerios when you were a kid. And the whole assembly drank their soup. Well, there was one visitor among the group who wasn't part of this pact of not seeing anything about the food. And he said, well, that's the most amazing soup I've ever had. And then this is the most extraordinary Cabernet I've ever had. And the food kept coming. And something funny happened over those hours, over the 7 courses that were served. This group, which had been bickering with each other for weeks, started to laugh. And then they started to talk about the conflicts that were festering among them. And there were apologies, and there were people owning up to things that they had done. By the time they left Babette's feast, they were transformed by this extravagant gift. We're going to share this feast this morning. It's this Lord's Supper that we tried to get the recipe for. But it'll be bread and it'll be juice. But it's also going to be topped off this morning with grapes. So after you take your bread and dip it into the cup and receive, then the person on the far end on each side will hold a platter of grapes. You don't have to take any, but if you'd like to, they're all separated. You can just take a clump or two. I just ask that you pocket that little, stem and toss it on your way out. But we are going to have a feast and come before the risen Lord. And then following worship today, we're going to carry this feast out into our community. We have 5 communion teams of an elder and a deacon, and each team is going to go to 2 homes, and they are going to share this fellowship. you are invited to go if you'd like. We'll be meeting after coffee fellowship in meeting room 2, and we have a list of who we're going to visit. You can ride along. You can be part of the family that will go and carry these gifts of our risen Lord. It won't be the road to Emmaus. It'll be Blue Ridge Boulevard or Raytown Road or 83rd Street or Willow. But along these roads and over the bread and juice, maybe even some grapes if we have some left over, we will experience together the risen Christ in our midst. And we will be bound together through that grace and love. Amen.